Have you ever been judged for something as simple as what you wear or what you carry? That moment when a stranger looks at you not for who you are, but for who they think you are. Now, imagine this. You're sitting in first class, finally breathing after months of hard work. You're proud, successful, composed. And then, a flight attendant walks up, looks at your handmade green bag and mocks it in front of everyone. The room goes silent. Eyes turn. You can feel the heat of humiliation on your skin. What would you do? Would you fight back? Stay quiet or walk away with your dignity intact, not knowing that your quiet grace would soon change an entire airline, and maybe the world watching? Because sometimes, the true test of power isn't in how loud you shout, but in how calmly you rise above. Tonight, we'll take you inside a story that started with prejudice and ended with redemption. A story about a woman who was judged for her skin and her style, until the world discovered she was married to the very man who ran the airline. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about humanity, choice, and grace under pressure. So ask yourself, if you were her, what kind of strength would you carry? Stay with me till the end. You're going to feel something real. And before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because stories like this remind us all what compassion can do. The jet bridge smelled faintly of coffee and jet fuel, that oddly comforting mix travelers learned to associate with the beginning of something new. It was just past 8 p.m. in New York City, and Atlantic Air Flight 88 was boarding for its overnight run to London Heathrow. First class shimmered in soft gold light, the kind meant to whisper luxury rather than shout it. Amara Cole adjusted the strap of her handbag, a handmade piece in deep emerald green, woven from plant-based fibers developed by her own company, Viridian Materials. It wasn't designer in the traditional sense. No logo, no metal plate, but it carried a quiet confidence, like its owner. The attendant by the entrance scanned her boarding pass, offered a rehearsed smile, and waved her toward the upper deck. Rows of wide leather seats gleamed like polished onyx. Every detail, the folded blanket, the chilled glass of water, was designed to say, "You belong here, if you can afford to." Amara moved with calm grace, settling into seat 2A by the window. She placed her bag on the seat beside her and exhaled slowly. This trip wasn't about rest. Tomorrow morning she'd meet with European investors to finalize Viridian's expansion deal. Still, there was something soothing about the hum of an airplane before takeoff that suspended silence before the storm of altitude. Across from her, a man in a dark sweater and simple jeans folded a newspaper. He looked more like a professor than a CEO, which ironically was exactly what he was. Marcus Cole, her husband, and the chief executive officer of Atlantic Air Group. To everyone else on the plane, he was just another quiet passenger. To her, he was the reason she could finally breathe after years of proving herself in boardrooms that looked at her skin before her resume. Their eyes met briefly. He gave her that small, knowing smile, the kind that said, "I'm here, even if I look away." She nodded back, the corner of her lips curving. The cabin door closed with a soft click. A woman's voice echoed from the front. "Good evening. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Atlantic Air Flight 88. We'll be departing shortly." The voice belonged to Heather Grant, the flight's first-class supervisor. She was in her late 40s, tall, composed, the kind of woman who moved as if the aisle itself were a runway built for her. 2 decades of service had carved into her an unshakable belief that the sky belonged to a certain kind of people, and she was its gatekeeper. Heather walked down the aisle with a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She greeted the older couple in 1A and 1B warmly, paused to adjust a blanket for the businessman in 2C, then stopped when her gaze fell on Amara. For a second, her smile stiffened, the tailored sweater, the dark braids tied neatly behind, the green bag. Heather's mind made a quick calculation, the kind that has no logic but plenty of bias. "Ma'am," she said with a polite chill, "would you like me to store your bag in the overhead for you?" Amara looked up, calm. "Thank you, but it's fine here." Heather's lips tightened. "Company policy recommends personal items be kept under the seat." Amara's tone stayed even. "I'll hold it during takeoff. It's fragile." The attendant's eyes flicked toward the bag again. "Judging? Of course, if you insist." She moved on, but the air felt slightly colder. Amara turned her gaze to the window. City lights blurred into streaks of gold against the night. She had learned long ago that confrontation wasn't always victory. Sometimes dignity meant silence, at least for a moment. Marcus noticed, of course. He'd seen that look before, the tight-lipped patience of a woman forced to measure every response so it wouldn't be used against her. He wanted to say something, but he waited. He wanted to see what the sky would reveal tonight. 10 minutes later, champagne glasses clinked around them. Heather offered the bottle to each passenger, but when she reached Amara, her tone was dry. "Would you prefer sparkling water?" she asked, as though champagne were a privilege that needed proving. "Champagne is fine," Amara replied softly. Heather poured too quickly, and the fizz spilled over the rim. "Oops," she said without apology, handing her a napkin. Amara smiled faintly. "Thank you." She dabbed the spill and looked out again. The plane began to taxi. The engines roared, the cabin trembled. As the aircraft lifted, New York fell away in glittering constellations of yellow light. Amara closed her eyes for a moment, whispering a prayer she always said before takeoff. A habit from her mother. "Let me rise with peace and land with grace." When she opened them, Heather was adjusting a passenger's pillow across the aisle. Laughter soft and genuine, now a warmth that hadn't been offered to her. Amara's chest tightened. A small ache. Not anger exactly, but recognition. She'd spent years earning seats in rooms where people smiled like that until she spoke, until they realized her voice carried authority. Her fingers traced the texture of her green bag. It was woven from fibers grown on farms led by single mothers across Georgia and Alabama. To her, it wasn't just a bag. It was history stitched into future. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked quietly, breaking her reverie. She nodded. "Just turbulence. Inside, not outside." He chuckled softly, eyes still on his book. But behind that casual posture, something in him sharpened. He'd seen too much of this, and too often it was ignored. Heather returned a few minutes later with dinner menus. Tonight's main course, grilled filet mignon or roasted salmon, she announced with a warm smile toward the businessman, then turned to Amara. "We do have a vegetarian option, if you prefer." Amara looked up, unbothered. "Salmon will be perfect." "Of course." Heather hesitated, then added, "You might find the lemon sauce strong." Amara met her eyes. "I'll manage." Heather moved away again, muttering something under her breath about standards. The businessman across the aisle gave Amara a sympathetic glance. She smiled, brushing it off. She had weathered worse storms than this. The cabin dimmed to twilight mode, blue light glowing along the ceiling. Marcus leaned closer. "Don't let it get to you." "I'm fine," Amara whispered. "People reveal themselves when they think no one's watching." He nodded slowly. "You're right." Then, almost to himself, But tonight, someone is watching. Outside, the ocean stretched endless and dark. Inside, the tension hummed just beneath the steady rhythm of the engines. Amara sipped her champagne, eyes calm but distant. She didn't know it yet, but the flight that had started as routine, would soon become a storm that would shake not only one woman's pride, but an entire company's conscience. The plane leveled off at 37,000 feet. Soft jazz played through the cabin speakers, the kind meant to lull you into believing that everything in life was smooth and controlled. For most passengers in first class, it was true. They leaned back, sipped champagne, scrolled through stock portfolios, and pretended turbulence was something that only happened to other people. For Heather Grant, turbulence wasn't outside the plane. It was inside her own head. She had done this for 20 years, serving billionaires, senators, and movie stars. She'd seen it all: bad tempers, impossible requests, even tears at 30,000 feet. But deep down, she believed one thing. First class was a privilege, not a right, and she saw herself as its guardian. She moved down the aisle with the grace of a woman who had memorized every inch of this aircraft. Her uniform was crisp, her hair in a tight bun, her lipstick the shade of quiet power. She smiled at the older couple in 1A, asked the gentleman in 2C about his scotch, adjusted a blanket for a young woman in 3B. Then her eyes landed on Amara Cole again, the woman in 2A, the one with the green bag, the one whose calmness felt misplaced. Heather couldn't help herself. Something about that bag bothered her. It wasn't from any brand she knew, not Louis Vuitton, not Prada, not even Tory Burch. It looked handcrafted, simple, too casual for this cabin. She thought, people like her always push boundaries. They want to prove they belong. But do they really? Amara didn't notice Heather's stare at first. She was typing quietly on her tablet, reviewing presentation slides. A gentle smile touched her face, the kind that came from focus, not arrogance. But when Heather leaned over to refill her water glass, the attendant's voice carried a tone that wasn't as neutral as her words. "Ma'am, is this your first time flying with Atlantic Air?" First class, Amara looked up. "No, not my first." Heather smiled politely. "Oh, of course. I just didn't see your name on our loyalty list." "It's under my husband's account," Amara said. Heather nodded, but her smile didn't change. "I see. Well, welcome back." She turned away, but her thoughts ran sharp. Husband's account, figures, at the galley. She whispered to another attendant, a younger woman named Claire. "Seat 2A. What's her deal?" Claire shrugged. "She's quiet, polite." Why, Heather rolled her eyes. "Just seems out of place." Claire frowned. "She seems nice," Heather replied under her breath. "Nice doesn't always mean right." Back at her seat, Amara could sense it, that small vibration of judgment that filled the air even when no one spoke. It was a feeling she'd known her whole life. She had learned to read it the way other people read weather, the shift in tone, the pause before a smile, the way ma'am could sound polite and poisonous at the same time. Marcus glanced up from his book. "You okay?" She nodded, "Just studying the atmosphere." He smiled. "You always were good at reading storms." Heather continued her rounds. Every time she passed 2A, she looked at the green bag. She couldn't resist. It looked too personal, too sentimental. To her, luxury was supposed to be impersonal, sleek, minimal, approved. She thought back to her own beginnings. She'd started as a junior attendant on short domestic routes, scraping through double shifts and dealing with passengers who didn't know her name. She'd worked her way up, and now, In this cabin, she had control. Maybe that's why she guarded it so fiercely. Maybe that's why she couldn't stand the sight of someone who looked like they didn't ask permission to belong. An hour into the flight, dinner service began. Heather brought plates to every table with the precision of a dancer. When she reached Amara, she hesitated, noticing the bag still on the seat beside her. "Ma'am, I'll need to move that bag for the meal service." Amara looked up gently. "I'll hold it on my lap." "Thank you." Heather's voice tightened. "It could be damaged by the tray table. Better to store it above." "It's fine," Amara replied. "I designed it myself. I'll take care of it." "You designed it," Heather repeated, eyebrows raised. "Oh, that's creative." Her tone was the kind that drew invisible quotation marks around the word creative. Marcus's eyes lifted, calm but alert. Amara simply smiled. "Yes, my company makes sustainable fabrics. This one's from plant fiber." Heather nodded slowly, pretending interest. "How interesting." Then she turned and walked away. At the galley, Claire asked quietly, "Everything okay?" Heather sighed. She said she designed that bag. Can you believe that Claire smiled? That's kind of cool. Heather laughed under her breath. "Sure. Next thing you know, she'll tell me she owns the airline." Claire frowned but said nothing, back in her seat. Amara could feel Marcus watching her. "You handled that gracefully," he said. "I'm not here to win arguments," she replied softly. "Some people only understand power. The rest, they learn later." He smiled faintly. "And what will she learn?" Amara's gaze stayed on the clouds. That respect can't be reserved for the rich. It's earned by how you treat the unknown. The plane flew on in silence for a while. Heather served dessert, laughing with passengers, offering refills until she noticed something that made her stop mid-step. The businessman in 2C had placed his briefcase on the seat beside him. Heather hadn't said a word about it, but now she realized the contrast, and for a brief second, something like guilt crossed her face. She quickly brushed it off. "It's different," she told herself. "That's a business case. It's professional." Still, somewhere inside, a small crack appeared in her certainty. After dinner, lights dimmed again. The sky outside was endless midnight blue, dotted with stars. Amara leaned back, finally letting her mind wander. She thought about her mother, who used to say, "The world will test your calm more than your strength." She thought about how true that was tonight. Heather came around once more for final checks. "Would you like another drink before you rest?" she asked. "No, thank you," Amara said gently. "Very well." Heather hesitated, her eyes flicking once more toward the green bag. "That's quite a color. Hard to miss." Amara smiled. "That's the point." Heather blinked, unsure what to make of that, then moved on. In the quiet that followed, Marcus whispered, "You're handling her better than I could." Amara smiled faintly. "You're the CEO. I'm just a passenger. Different rules." "Not tonight," he said under his breath. She turned toward him, curious. "What do you mean?" He gave that same quiet smile, the one that always carried something hidden. "You'll see." Outside, the engines hummed steady, the stars gliding past like witnesses. Inside, two women, one clinging to control, one holding her dignity, flew toward a storm neither could see yet. The night outside was velvet black, stitched with tiny silver stars. Inside the cabin, soft blue light ran along the ceiling like a quiet river. Dinner trays had been cleared, the hum of the engine steady as a heartbeat. Most passengers were drifting into the calm haze of high altitude. Amara Cole wasn't asleep, She sat in seat 2A, looking at the green bag resting beside her. The fabric shimmered faintly in the cabin light, catching hints of turquoise and gold. It was more than just an accessory. It was a symbol, a reminder, a story. That bag had been the first prototype her company ever made. She remembered the day she held it for the first time. The material felt alive, soft yet strong, spun from the recycled plant fibers that Viridian Materials had developed after years of research. It wasn't just sustainable. It was beautiful. Proof that innovation could carry soul. Her husband, Marcus, had given it to her as a gift the day her company went public. He'd said, "This bag will travel with you before your words ever do." Tonight, those words felt heavier than usual. Heather Grant walked past again, stopping near the galley. She couldn't take her eyes off that bag. It bothered her. Something about it seemed almost deliberate, as if the woman carried it not for fashion, but for statement. Heather didn't like statements. She liked rules. She turned to her junior attendant. "Claire, see that bag in 2A?" Claire looked over. "Yeah, it's nice." Heather's lips tightened. "Nice isn't the word I'd use. It's distracting." Claire frowned. Distracting, Heather folded her arms. "You know what I mean. This is first class, not a craft fair." Claire hesitated. "She's polite. Heather, she hasn't done anything wrong." Heather sighed. "You're young. You'll learn. Some people test boundaries just to see if you'll blink." She didn't mean to sound cruel. In her mind, she was keeping order. That's what she told herself every time that old voice whispered inside, the one that said she'd never been good enough either. Back in her seat, Amara could feel Heather's stare. She didn't have to look up to know it. Years of navigating boardrooms had trained her to sense that subtle shift in the air when someone doubted her right to be there. She took a slow breath and placed a hand on the green fabric. The fibers were warm under her palm. It felt like a pulse, like something alive. Marcus leaned slightly toward her. "You're doing that thing again," he said softly. "What thing?" she asked. "That quiet focus right before you decide whether to fight or forgive." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm deciding both." He chuckled, then leaned back. "That's why you scare people." Heather returned a few minutes later with coffee service. She stopped at 2A, her tone just a little too polite. "Would you like cream or sugar?" "Ma'am, black is fine," Amara said. Heather poured, her hand steady, her smile tighter. "That's quite an unusual bag you have there. Did you buy it somewhere local?" Amara looked up, her expression calm. "I didn't buy it. My company made it." Heather blinked. "Your company?" "Yes, Viridian Materials. We create sustainable textiles." "Oh," Heather said, a soft laugh escaping her throat. "So, that's real. The plant stuff." "It's real," Amara replied, smiling gently. "And it's strong, like people who get underestimated." For a heartbeat, the two women locked eyes. Heather felt something sting embarrassment, maybe even shame, though she didn't name it. She turned quickly. "Well, I suppose it's innovative." When she walked away, Marcus whispered, "You handled that like a diplomat." Amara looked down at her cup. Sometimes silence makes louder statements than anger. Heather returned to the galley, her pulse faster than before. She didn't know why the conversation had gotten under her skin. The woman hadn't been rude. In fact, she'd been disarmingly kind. And that kindness felt like a mirror, one Heather didn't want to look into. She muttered to herself, "Always the calm ones. Always make you feel like you're the problem." Claire overheard. Setting down a tray, Maybe she's just trying to be nice. Heather shot her a glance. Nice doesn't mean innocent. Claire sighed. You really think she did something wrong? Heather hesitated. I think she's pretending. People like that always pretend. People like what Claire asked quietly. Heather didn't answer. She just turned back to the aisle. Voice clipped. Focus on your section. Outside. The stars blinked like distant lighthouses. Inside. The air felt thinner than before. An hour later, turbulence began to shake the plane gently. The seatbelt signs flickered on. Heather's voice came through the speaker, calm and confident. Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts. We're passing through some light turbulence. Amara closed her tablet, securing her things. The bag slipped slightly toward the floor. She reached down quickly, but Heather was already there, steadying it. Careful, Heather said sharply. Wouldn't want it to get scuffed. Amara smiled. Thank you. Heather looked at her again. You must really love that thing. Amara nodded. It reminds me of where I came from. Where's that someplace small, Amara said softly, but with dreams big enough to fly? Heather froze, unsure why that line landed so deep. She straightened up quickly, mumbling something about service checks, and walked away. Marcus watched the whole exchange. He didn't speak. He just studied Heather, his expression unreadable. When the turbulence passed, Amara leaned her head against the seat, eyes closed. She remembered her first big investor meeting 5 years ago, when a man in a Navy suit told her, "We don't usually fund people with your kind of background." She'd smiled then, too. She'd learned that calm could disarm prejudice faster than fury ever could. Now, sitting 37,000 feet above the Atlantic, she realized she was facing the same test again. Different stage. Same story. Heather moved through the cabin one last time before rest service. She adjusted a pillow, checked a blanket, smiled at a couple, but when she reached 2A again, she stopped. Ma'am, she said, for safety reasons, that bag should really be stored overhead. Amara looked up, tired but still patient. It's safer here with me. Heather exhaled sharply. I'm sorry, but rules are rules. Marcus turned his head slowly. Is that a written policy, Ms. Grant? Heather blinked. Excuse me, he repeated calmly. Is that an actual policy or just your preference? Her confidence wavered. Well, it's a recommendation. Then we'll keep it here, Marcus said simply, eyes steady. Heather hesitated, then gave a tight smile. As you wish. She walked away, heat rising in her chest. In the galley? Claire whispered. Everything okay? Heather's voice cracked. I don't know what it is about that couple, but they make me feel small. Claire looked at her gently. Maybe it's not them. Maybe it's what they reflect. Heather frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Sometimes, Claire said, when people shine, it just reminds us where we're dim. Heather didn't answer. She just stared at the coffee machine, its reflection warped in the metal. Back in row 2. Amara and Marcus sat in silence. Amara whispered, You didn't have to speak up. He smiled. Didn't I? She's just a woman doing her job. She's a woman forgetting what her job means, he said quietly. Amara reached for his hand. Let's not make this a war. Marcus nodded. It's not. It's a lesson. The engines hummed on. The cabin lights dimmed further. Most passengers drifted into sleep, unaware that a quiet tension was thickening just a few rows away. Amara closed her eyes, one hand resting gently on the green bag. For her, it was more than a possession. It was her story of resilience stitched together by invisible hands. But for Heather Grant, that same bag was about to become the match that lit the flame she could no longer control. Morning hadn't yet arrived, but the cabin light shifted to a faint gold, simulating sunrise somewhere above the Atlantic. The passengers stirred slowly, faces half lit in that false dawn. The scent of fresh coffee filled the air, rich and bitter. Amara Cole was already awake. She'd never been good at sleeping on planes. Her body might rest, but her mind didn't know how to stop thinking. The bag still sat beside her, its green surface catching soft light. It looked almost alive, like it was breathing with the rhythm of the engines. She ran her fingers over the stitching, remembering the women who'd helped make it. In Georgia, she had met them single mothers, former textile workers who'd lost jobs when factories moved overseas. Viridian Materials had hired them back, trained them to weave a future instead of just fabric. It wasn't just a bag. It was a piece of her heart sitting on that seat. Heather Grant came through the aisle again, hair and uniform perfectly in place, as if the night had never touched her. Her face wore that calm mask of authority, but her thoughts were messy underneath. She couldn't stop thinking about the woman in 2A, about the confidence that came so naturally to her, about the way she didn't shrink, didn't try to impress. It made Heather uncomfortable, and she didn't understand why. She stopped beside 1A to pour coffee for the older gentleman there. He smiled and asked for cream. She gave it, laughing politely, her tone warm. Then, a few steps later, her smile faded when she reached 2A again. "Coffee, ma'am?" she asked, voice cooler. Amara nodded. "Thank you." Heather poured without looking directly at her. The silence between them felt thick. Then, from across the aisle, the businessman in 2C glanced over and said loudly, "That's a beautiful bag you've got there. Never seen one like it." Amara smiled. "Thank you. It's from my company." "Oh, you own a company," he said, eyebrows raised in surprise. Amara's tone was calm. "Yes, we work in sustainable materials." The man nodded, impressed. "Well, good for you." Heather's lips tightened. The words "good for you" lingered in her head. She'd heard them before, said them herself, but tonight they sounded wrong. The businessman leaned toward Heather, whispering, "Don't you think it's nice when people like her succeed? It gives hope, doesn't it?" Heather forced a smile. "Of course." The phrase echoed in her mind like static. People like her. Claire, the junior attendant, passed by just then, catching the tone in Heather's voice. She hesitated, then said softly, "Morning, Ms. Grant." "Everything all right?" Heather nodded quickly. "Just fine. Keep moving. Please." But her pulse was fast. She moved down the aisle again, focusing on the other passengers. But every time she turned, her eyes found Amara. That woman's calmness had become unbearable. It was as if she carried some invisible shield, one Heather couldn't pierce with her authority or her rules. Amara, on the other hand, was fighting her own quiet battle. She'd noticed the glances, the whispers, the subtle way Heather's tone changed around her. She'd learned long ago that prejudice rarely shouted. It smiled. It asked too many questions. It lingered too long. She remembered being 10 years old, sitting in her mother's kitchen while the radio played gospel music. Her mother had said, "The world won't always clap when you rise. Baby, sometimes it'll just stare." Now she understood what her mother meant. Marcus stirred beside her, rubbing his eyes. "You didn't sleep." She smiled, barely. "You're thinking again." "Always." He nodded. "You still want to handle this your way?" Yes. He gave a small grin. Then I'll just watch. For now. Heather came by again, collecting breakfast orders. She leaned slightly over Amara's seat. Ma'am, for breakfast, we have an egg frittata or the continental fruit plate. The frittata sounds good, Amara said. Heather's tone was sharp but polite. I'll bring you the fruit plate. It's lighter. Amara looked up. I prefer the frittata. Heather hesitated, then forced a smile. Of course. My mistake. Marcus watched the exchange, eyes narrowing slightly. The air between the two women seemed to hum with quiet electricity. Heather continued her service, but Claire caught her in the galley afterward. Why'd you tell her what to eat? Heather's voice was defensive. I was trying to be considerate. Considerate or controlling? Claire asked softly. Heather frowned. Don't start. Claire. The younger attendant looked at her for a long moment. You know, sometimes we build walls and forget who we're keeping out. Heather didn't respond. She turned away, pretending to adjust the coffee pots. Back in the cabin, the breakfast trays arrived. Heather set down Amara's frittata with precise movements, as if every gesture had to prove her control. Amara thanked her. Heather didn't answer. The businessman in 2C leaned over again. That's the kind of service I like, he said, laughing. Amara smiled politely, but her eyes were distant. A few moments later, Heather returned to collect a tray from another passenger. As she passed Amara's row, she overheard a soft conversation between Amara and Marcus. I keep thinking, Amara said, about how kindness always feels like a choice, but prejudice never does. Marcus replied quietly. That's because one takes strength, the other takes fear. Heather froze mid-step. For the first time that night, she felt something shift deep inside her. The words had hit harder than she expected. She turned away quickly, her cheeks hot. The turbulence began again, gentle but persistent. The plane rocked slightly, the coffee in Heather's pot rippling. She steadied herself against the seat, inhaling deeply. Amara looked up, offering a small smile. Everything all right? Heather nodded stiffly. Just turbulence. Amara's voice was soft. Sometimes it's not the air that's rough. It's the space between people. Heather blinked, unsure what to say. She just moved on, heart pounding. As breakfast ended, the cabin lights brightened further. The sky outside had turned pale blue, the curve of the earth glowing gold. Marcus closed his laptop. We land in an hour, he said. Amara nodded. Longest hour of the night. He smiled. Or the most important one. Heather passed by once more. This time slower. She didn't speak, didn't comment, but her eyes lingered again on the green bag. That simple piece of fabric had become her mirror, showing her the parts of herself she'd tried to ignore. She wondered, silently, why it was so hard to let go of pride. Claire joined her near the galley. You've been quiet, she said. Heather looked out the window. Just tired. Claire smiled gently. Maybe it's time to rest the part of you that's always judging. Heather didn't reply, but something softened in her posture. The seatbelt sign lit up again. Marcus reached over, fastening Amara's belt for her. Their hands brushed, a quiet gesture that carried more love than words. Amara turned to the window. The clouds below stretched endlessly, glowing in the morning sun. She whispered to herself, New day. Marcus glanced at her. What nothing, she said. Just thinking how beautiful peace can look, even when it's hard to earn. He smiled. You've always had a gift for turning pain into poetry. She shrugged. Maybe it's the only way I know how to stay kind. The plane began its slow descent toward London, engines humming lower. The tension that had filled the night hadn't vanished. It had only changed shape. Heather took one last look at Amara as she walked down the aisle for final checks. She didn't speak, but the expression in her eyes was different now. It wasn't contempt. It was confusion mixed with something almost like respect. Amara noticed, just slightly, and nodded in acknowledgement. As the plane cut through thin clouds, the sunlight burst through, flooding the cabin in gold. The reflection danced off the green bag, painting soft light across Amara's hands, somewhere between New York and London. Two women who'd started the night as strangers had become something else, unwilling mirrors of each other's truths. The story wasn't finished. The real storm hadn't even begun. The plane glided through the final stretch of sky, its wings cutting across thin clouds like brushstrokes on a white canvas. The captain's voice drifted through the intercom, warm and steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent into London Heathrow. Local time is 7:45 People stretched in their seats, blinking against the soft morning light. A low murmur filled the cabin. Coffee requests, the shuffle of papers, the quiet rustle of luxury magazines. Amara Cole adjusted her seat, careful not to disturb the green bag still resting beside her. She looked rested, though she hadn't truly slept. Marcus glanced at her and smiled. "You made it through the night," he said. "Barely," she replied, "but I survived." Heather Grant moved briskly down the aisle, her expression sharp again. Whatever hint of reflection had touched her earlier seemed buried now beneath the morning routine. The closer the plane came to landing, the more she clung to order. She straightened a pillow, picked up a napkin, reminded a passenger to return their seat upright. Control made her feel safe. And there was one last piece of disorder she still wanted to fix: the bag in seat 2B. It was the same one that had unsettled her all night, the one that seemed to defy every rule of decorum she lived by. She stopped beside Amara's row, eyes narrowing slightly. "Ma'am," she began, her tone polite but firm, "we'll need to clear this seat for landing." Amara looked up. "It's not blocking anything. I'll hold it during descent." Heather gave a tight smile. "I'm afraid regulations don't allow personal items on empty seats during landing." Marcus, seated across the aisle, lowered his newspaper slowly. His voice was calm. "Which regulation is that?" "Exactly." Heather hesitated. "It's standard procedure. Company policy." Marcus asked, tone even. She nodded quickly. "Yes, company policy." Amara exhaled softly, still patient. "It's fine. I'll move it." She lifted the bag gently to her lap. Heather should have walked away, but something in her refused. Something in her pride wouldn't let this quiet woman end the conversation so easily. "I just want to make sure everything looks proper for arrival," Heather added. "First impressions matter." Amara froze for a heartbeat. Her eyes lifted, meeting Heather's. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. Proper Heather's smile didn't waver. "Yes, ma'am. Presentation is important in first class." Marcus put down the newspaper entirely now. The silence between them drew the attention of nearby passengers. The businessman in 2C turned slightly curious. Amara's tone stayed soft, but her words carried weight. "I see. And you think my bag looks improper." Heather's lips parted, but no sound came. She hadn't expected to be called out. She meant to correct, not confront. "I didn't mean—" she started. Marcus interrupted gently. "No, please. I'd like to hear what you meant." Heather swallowed, her voice suddenly smaller. "I just meant it stands out. It doesn't quite fit the atmosphere. The atmosphere of what Amara asked. Comfort luxury. Or something else. For the first time, Heather's composure cracked. I didn't mean to offend you, ma'am. But you did, Marcus said quietly. The businessman across the aisle cleared his throat. Uncomfortable. Claire, the junior attendant, hurried up from the galley, sensing tension. Everything okay here? She asked softly. Heather straightened her shoulders. Everything's fine. Marcus looked at her, steady and calm. I'm not sure it is. Heather turned to him. Defensive now. Sir, I was simply enforcing company standards. We want all passengers to have a premium experience. Amara smiled faintly. So you're saying my presence lessens that experience? Her voice was gentle, but every word landed like a stone. Heather stammered, No, of course not. I was only referring to my bag. Yes. Amara's eyes softened, almost sad. You know, I've spent most of my life being told what doesn't fit. My clothes, my tone, my hair, my success. It's always the same word. Doesn't fit. The cabin was silent now. Even the sound of the engine seemed to fade. Heather's throat tightened. That's not what I meant. I know, Amara said quietly. You meant well. Most people do when they hurt someone like me. Marcus reached out, resting a hand on his wife's shoulder. His voice was low, measured. You've been patient enough. Amara nodded. I have. She looked at Heather, her eyes kind but firm. I don't expect special treatment, just equal respect. Heather stood frozen. For the first time in years, she didn't know how to respond. The authority she wore like armor had turned to weight. Claire stepped in, placing a hand gently on Heather's arm. Let me finish the checks, she said quietly. Heather didn't argue. She just nodded, stepping back a little, her breath shaky. As Claire continued the final preparations, the passengers whispered among themselves. The businessman in 2C leaned toward Marcus and whispered, Is everything all right? Marcus smiled faintly. Everything's finally getting there. The captain's voice came over the speakers again. Cabin crew, please prepare for landing. Heather moved back toward the galley, heart pounding. She could still hear the woman's words echoing in her mind. Just equal respect. She poured herself a quick cup of water, hands trembling slightly. Claire looked at her. You okay? Heather nodded, eyes fixed on the window. I thought I knew who I was up here, she whispered. Turns out I'm still learning. Claire gave a small, kind smile. It's never too late. The plane dipped lower, slicing through clouds. London stretched out below, its rivers of light curving through morning fog. Amara looked out the window, her reflection faint against the sky. She whispered, almost to herself, You'd think after all these years, altitude would make things clearer. Marcus turned to her. What are you thinking? She smiled faintly. That I don't need to win every battle. Sometimes it's enough just to stay standing. He nodded. And sometimes standing is exactly how you win. As the plane descended, the wheels locked. The flaps shifted. The sound grew louder. But inside the cabin, there was stillness, a strange kind of calm that comes after a storm has spoken its truth. The landing gear touched the runway with a soft thud. Passengers exhaled in unison, some clapping lightly. The tension of the night melted into relief. Heather took one last deep breath before walking back down the aisle to thank passengers for flying with them. When she reached 2A, she hesitated. Amara looked up at her, expression open, forgiving even now. Heather cleared her throat. Thank you for flying Atlantic Air, Mrs. Cole. Amara smiled gently. Thank you for the flight. Ms. Grant. There was no sarcasm in her voice, no sting, just grace, and that made it harder. Heather moved on, her throat tight. She wanted to say more, but words failed her. Marcus gathered their things as the seatbelt sign went off. He glanced toward his wife. You handled that better than most CEOs would. She laughed softly. That's because I wasn't acting like one. I was just being human. He nodded. The world could use more of that. As passengers began to stand, Heather looked toward them one last time. She didn't know who Marcus really was, not yet. But something told her this flight wasn't over. There was a story here she hadn't fully read, a truth that would land harder than any plane could. And as the door opened to the cool London morning, the air that rushed in felt different, cleaner, sharper, almost like forgiveness waiting for its chance to be spoken. London morning light spilled through the jet bridge windows, pale and cold. Inside the terminal, travelers rushed through customs lines with sleepy faces and half-open eyes. But in the private arrivals lounge of Atlantic Air, time seemed to move slower, more deliberate. Amara Cole sat on a cream-colored sofa near the window, still holding her emerald bag. It looked the same as it had during the flight, though something inside her had changed. She felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Marcus Cole stood a few feet away, talking quietly on his phone. His tone was calm but precise, that signature blend of warmth and command that made people listen without realizing they were obeying. Yes, he said into the phone. I'll handle it personally. Make sure legal is briefed before the press hears anything. He hung up and walked back toward his wife. You called legal already, she asked. He nodded. Someone recorded that exchange. It's on social media. Her eyebrows lifted. That fast? He sighed. Nothing moves faster than outrage online. She leaned back, closing her eyes for a second. Poor woman. She has no idea what's coming. Marcus studied her face. You still feel sorry for her? Amara opened her eyes. I do. Maybe not for what she said, but for why she said it. He sat beside her, quiet for a moment. That's the difference between us. I see harm, you see hurt, and you think they're not connected, she asked. He smiled faintly. You always turn my sentences into lessons. A soft chime interrupted them. A staff member approached, polished, polite, nervous. Mr. Cole, Ms. Cole, she said. Your car's ready. The company car. Marcus thanked her. They stepped into the London air together. It smelled of rain and jet fuel. Outside, a black car waited, sleek and understated. The driver opened the door, nodding. Good morning, sir. As the car pulled away, city buildings slid past gray stone, glass towers, morning traffic. Amara watched through the window, her thoughts far behind. Marcus finally broke the silence. I have to meet the board this afternoon. They'll expect a statement. And what will you tell them, she asked. The truth, he said simply. That bias at 37,000 feet is still bias. Amara nodded, thoughtful. You'll defend her. I'll hold her accountable, he replied. But I won't destroy her. She turned toward him. Even after everything she said, Marcus's eyes met hers. If I destroy her, I destroy the chance for anyone like her to learn. The car rolled into central London. Streetlights reflected off wet pavement. The driver took a corner slowly, and for a while, neither of them spoke. Finally, Amara said quietly, You're not angry with her. You're angry with what she represents. Marcus leaned back. I built this company believing we'd risen above all that. We train for it, write policies about it, celebrate diversity in every brochure. And yet, there it was on our flagship route. She reached for his hand. You can't control every human heart, Marcus. He looked down at their intertwined fingers, his voice softer. Maybe not, but I can control what happens next. Outside. Big Ben loomed against the gray sky. He dropped her off first at the hotel, a quiet boutique near Hyde Park. She needed rest before her investor meeting that evening. Promise me one thing, she said before getting out. What's that? Don't lead this from anger. Lead it from grace.
The world already has enough men fighting fire with fire. He smiled, eyes tired but affectionate. You always were the better half of my conscience. She kissed his cheek. Just remember, storms don't start from thunder. They start from silence. He watched her walk into the lobby, the green bag swinging gently by her side. Back at Atlantic Air headquarters later that morning, the storm was brewing exactly as she predicted. Screens glowed with social media posts. First-class attendant humiliates passenger over handmade bag. Racism in the skies. Atlantic Air under fire. In the conference room, executives sat in strained silence. Marcus entered, removing his coat.
Every head turned. Morning, he said simply, setting down his briefcase. Let's talk about the truth before we talk about damage control. He played the short clip someone had uploaded Heather Grant's voice, sharp and dismissive. Amara's calm response. The tension so thick it didn't need subtitles. When the video ended, the room stayed quiet. Marcus looked around the table. That's not who we claim to be. But it happened on our plane, in our uniform, under our logo. A marketing director spoke up nervously. Public relations can draft a statement apologizing. No, Marcus interrupted gently. We're not issuing sympathy. We're issuing responsibility. The legal counsel frowned. We should be careful with wording. Careful is what created this mess, Marcus said. People tiptoe around hard truths until someone catches them on camera. He turned toward his operations chief. Heather Grant, 20 years of service. What's her record? Excellent, the chief admitted. Never a complaint until now. Marcus nodded slowly. Then this isn't about one bad employee. It's about the small cracks that form when no one's watching. Across the city, in her hotel room, Amara sat by the window sipping tea. Her phone buzzed an article already trending. She sighed. The comments were predictable praise, outrage, debate. One caught her attention. Dignity is the new rebellion. She smiled at that. Her assistant knocked and entered with updates. Investors confirmed for 7 tonight. They also saw the video, ma'am. Some said it made them prouder to work with you. Amara nodded slowly. Funny how pain travels faster than truth, but sometimes it brings truth with it. By afternoon, Marcus called her. His voice was calm again. The decision made. I met with the board. He said, Heather's been suspended pending review, but I'm not stopping there. What are you planning? She asked. An internal initiative. Equal skies. Mandatory empathy training for every employee. Real conversations, not checklist. Amara smiled softly. That sounds like something I'd design. He chuckled. Maybe you will. I want you to co-chair it with me. She was silent for a beat. You're serious completely. People will say it's favoritism. Then they'll have to learn what equality actually means. He replied. That evening, Heather Grant sat alone in her small London hotel room, still in uniform. Her phone buzzed constantly, texts, emails, calls from colleagues. She hadn't answered any. On the television, the clip played again. Sound muted, but image unmistakable. She watched herself freeze the moment Amara had said, just equal respect. For the first time, Heather saw herself from the outside. The tone of her own voice made her flinch. Tears blurred her eyes. She whispered into the silence, "What did I become?" She reached for her phone, hesitated, then typed a message to her supervisor. "I want to speak with Mr. Cole personally, not to defend myself, to understand." Outside, London rain began to fall, a soft, cleansing rain. At that same hour, Marcus and Amara met again for dinner, a quiet corner table overlooking the Thames. The city lights reflected on the water like gold ripples. "You really want her to talk to you?" Amara asked. Marcus nodded. "If change means anything, it has to start with listening." She smiled, lifting her glass. "To listening, then." He raised his glass too. "And to truth, even when it hurts." As they toasted, the storm they both knew was coming gathered quietly beyond the horizon, not one of destruction, but of revelation. Rain fell in quiet sheets against the tall glass of Atlantic Air headquarters. The city outside blurred into gray streaks of motion. Inside, the world felt still. Heather Grant sat in the small waiting room, her uniform pressed, her posture rigid. Her hands were clasped together, resting on her lap, fingers twisting the edge of a napkin. The napkin had long lost its shape, like her confidence. The receptionist had offered her tea, but she couldn't bring herself to drink it. Her mouth was dry. Her heart beat loud enough to hear in her ears. When she'd messaged the airline's leadership the night before, she hadn't expected a reply. She'd expected silence, or worse, dismissal. But instead, there had been an answer. "Mr. Marcus Cole will meet you at 9 a.m. Now, it was 5 minutes to 9. Every second felt like its own test. A door opened quietly. The receptionist looked up. "Mr. Cole will see you now." Heather stood, smoothing her uniform automatically, though her hands trembled slightly. She followed the assistant down a quiet hallway, lined with photographs of planes and smiling employees. Each picture carried a slogan beneath it, above and beyond. "Every passenger matters." The words felt heavier now. Marcus Cole's office was large but not intimidating. There was light, warmth, even softness to it. Plants lined the window, and a shelf behind his desk held books, family photos, and a small model of an early Atlantic Air plane. He looked up as she entered. "Ms. Grant." Heather swallowed. "Mr. Cole." He gestured toward the seat across from him. "Please, sit." She did, though her back stayed perfectly straight. For a moment, he said nothing. He just studied her face, not with judgment, but with quiet patience, the kind of patience that made people speak before they meant to. Finally, Heather broke the silence. "I'm sure you've seen the video." Marcus nodded slowly. "I have." Her throat tightened. "I came here because I needed to see the person behind the headlines, and because I needed to see myself through someone else's eyes." He leaned back slightly. "That's a rare kind of honesty." Heather exhaled, her voice trembling. "I've been in this company for 20 years. I started as a gate agent, worked my way up. I thought I knew how to treat people, but on that flight, something in me snapped." "Snapped," Marcus repeated gently. She nodded. "That woman, Mrs. Cole. She reminded me of everything I wasn't. Graceful, calm, unshakable. I saw her, and instead of admiring her, I felt small. I let that feeling turn into something ugly." Marcus's expression didn't change, but his eyes softened. "You do understand what happened then?" Heather looked down. "I do now. I thought professionalism was about control. Turns out it's about compassion." She paused, then added quietly, "I've been reading comments online. I know what people are saying about me. They're not wrong." He folded his hands. "You made a mistake, a painful one. But acknowledging it is the first real step toward change." Heather's eyes filled, though she didn't cry. "I can't undo it. I can only learn from it. That's why I came. To say I'm sorry to your wife. To you. To anyone who looked at that video and saw the same hurt they've lived through." For a long moment, Marcus didn't speak. The only sound in the room was the rain against the glass. Finally, he said, "Do you know who my wife is? Ms. Grant." Heather hesitated. "I know her name now. Amara Cole." He nodded. "She built Viridian materials from nothing. Every fabric, every thread the company produces comes from her belief that beauty should never come at the cost of dignity." Heather's lips parted slightly. "That bag." "Yes," Marcus said softly. "The one you dismissed as improper. It's made by women who were once told they'd never work again. Single mothers, veterans, immigrants, people rebuilding their lives through her vision." Heather pressed her lips together, shame flooding her chest. Marcus leaned forward slightly. "What you saw as a fashion statement was her story. What you mocked was her mission." She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "I didn't see any of that. I just saw what I wanted to see." Marcus's voice stayed calm, but there was gravity in it. "We all do. Sometimes. The question is what we do once we realize it." Heather finally looked up. "I want to make it right, but I don't know how." He was quiet for a moment. Then he stood and walked to the window. "You can't change the past, Miss Grant, but you can choose what kind of story it tells about you." He turned back to her. "There's something I want you to be part of. We're launching an initiative, Equal Skies. It's about empathy, accountability, and honest dialogue. Real training, not corporate slogans." Heather blinked. "You'd still let me be part of this?" After everything, Marcus smiled faintly. "That's exactly why you should be part of it. People won't learn from perfection. They'll learn from someone who's been broken and chose to rebuild." Her voice cracked. "I don't deserve that kind of grace." He shook his head gently. "Grace isn't about deserving. It's about opportunity." She took a shaky breath, nodding slowly. "Then I'll do it. I'll help however I can." "Good," he said softly. "But before we go forward, there's one more thing." Heather's heart sank. "What is it?" Marcus's tone softened. "My wife wants to meet you." Heather froze. "Amara." He nodded. "She asked for it. I don't know if I can face her." "You already faced the world," Marcus said. "This will be easier. She's not here to punish you. She's here to talk." Heather's voice was barely a whisper. "When tomorrow morning," he said, "same place." "Nene." Heather nodded slowly, her pulse echoing in her chest. Marcus extended his hand. She hesitated for a second, then shook it. His grip was firm, but kind. As she left the office, the air outside felt different. The rain had stopped. London sunlight broke through the clouds in soft streaks, spilling across the glass hallways. For the first time since the flight, Heather felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not peace, not relief, but hope fragile, trembling hope. That evening, Amara sat in her hotel room, reading reports and answering emails. Her phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. "She came. She's sincere," Amara typed back. "Then I'll see her tomorrow." She set the phone aside and looked out the window. The city glowed gold and gray. Somewhere out there, a woman was learning the same lesson she'd once learned herself, that dignity often begins with apology. Amara whispered quietly to herself. Maybe change really does start one conversation at a time. The next morning would prove it. Morning sunlight filled the private meeting room at the Viridian London office. It was a quiet space, soft chairs, walls painted in muted cream, and a small table set with water and 2 cups of coffee. The air smelled faintly of jasmine tea. Amara Cole sat at the far end of the table, her posture relaxed, her expression calm. She had dressed simply white blouse, black trousers, hair tied back. No jewelry, no statement, only grace. Marcus had offered to stay, but she'd said no. This meeting needed to happen between 2 women, not 2 hierarchies. The door opened softly. Heather Grant stepped in. She wasn't in uniform this time. She wore a navy dress, plain and modest. The change suited. Her less armor, more truth. Mrs. Cole, Heather said quietly. Amara smiled gently. Please, call me Amara. Heather hesitated, then nodded. Amara. They sat. The silence between them wasn't tense. It was cautious, like 2 people walking across a frozen lake, testing the ice beneath their feet. Heather spoke first. I don't know how to begin without sounding rehearsed. Then don't rehearse, Amara said softly. Just speak. Heather took a breath. I'm sorry, not just for what I said, but for what I thought. That flight showed me something I didn't want to see in myself. The bias, the pride, the judgment. It wasn't about you, it was about me. I saw your confidence and mistook it for arrogance because I didn't understand it. Amara listened quietly, eyes steady but kind. Understanding begins where assumption ends. Heather looked down. I keep replaying that moment when I told you your bag didn't fit the atmosphere. I can't believe those words came out of my mouth. Amara folded her hands. I can, because I've heard them all my life from teachers, employers, even strangers. The words change, but the meaning doesn't. They say, you don't belong here. Heather's eyes glistened. I wish I could take it back. You can't, Amara said gently, but you can take it forward. Heather frowned slightly. Take it forward. Carry it as a lesson, Amara said. Let it remind you that sometimes the smallest words carry the heaviest weight. Heather nodded slowly, wiping a tear before it could fall. When the video went viral, I was angry at first, at you, at the passengers who filmed it, at the world for judging me. But then I watched it again, and I saw my own face, my own tone. I didn't recognize that woman. It broke something inside me. Amara's expression softened. Maybe it broke something that needed breaking. Heather gave a small, sad laugh. Maybe. My mother used to say humility only grows in the cracks of our pride. They both smiled faintly at that. Amara leaned forward slightly. Tell me, Heather, what made you join this line of work? Heather blinked at the sudden shift. I was 19. My father had just passed. We didn't have much, and I needed to help my mom. Flying felt like escape, like freedom. Did you find it? Amara asked. For a while, Heather said, but somewhere along the way. I stopped flying for joy and started flying for control. Every rule, every uniform, every checklist, it made me feel safe. Amara nodded thoughtfully. Safety is good, until it becomes a cage. Heather exhaled, the truth of it settling in. You know what's strange? You were the first passenger in years who made me see how small that cage had become. I didn't mean to, Amara said softly. I know, Heather replied. That's what makes it so powerful. They sat in silence for a few seconds. The kind of silence that wasn't empty but full of reflection, of realization, of two lives momentarily intertwined by consequence. Then Amara reached for her green bag, placing it gently on the table between them. Its surface gleamed softly in the sunlight. This, she said, was made by women who were told they were replaceable. They weren't. This bag is their story, their redemption stitched into every thread. Heather stared at it, her throat tight. I see that now. Amara smiled faintly. You didn't before. But that's all right. The world teaches us to see labels before people. You're learning to unlearn. Heather's voice trembled. I want to do better. Not because I got caught, but because I got changed. That's the right reason, Amara said gently. Heather hesitated, then asked, Your husband, does he really want me in this Equal Skies program? Amara nodded. He does. And so do I. Heather frowned, confused. Why? Because people need to see that change is possible, Amara said. They need to see that the same person who made a mistake can help others avoid it. That's redemption. That's leadership. Heather's eyes welled again. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Amara's tone was soft but firm. Forgiveness isn't earned. It's accepted. Heather looked at her for a long moment, then whispered, Thank you. Amara reached across the table, placing her hand gently over Heather's. Let's not make this about guilt. Let's make it about growth. Heather nodded, her voice steadying. I'll do it. I'll work with your program. I'll share my story. I'll face the people who saw that video and show them I'm more than that moment. Amara smiled. Then we both win. They both stood. Heather felt lighter, like she'd left a decade of weight in that chair. Before she left, she turned back. Amara, yes, you said something on the flight. You told me kindness can be louder than anger. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. Amara smiled warmly. Good, because that's the sound the world needs to hear more often. Heather nodded once, deeply, then walked toward the door. As she opened it, Marcus was standing there, as if he'd known the exact moment to return. He greeted her with a quiet nod. How did it go? He asked. Heather looked back at the room for a second, then at him. Better than I deserved. He smiled gently, then it went exactly as it should. When she left, Amara walked to the window. Outside, the city was alive again, cars moving, people crossing streets, sunlight spilling over the Thames. She thought about Heather's words, her honesty, her trembling apology. It wasn't weakness. It was courage, the kind that begins with admitting you were wrong. Marcus stepped beside her. You were right, he said. She's learning. Amara turned toward him, smiling softly. We all are. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. You still carrying that bag everywhere? She laughed lightly. It carries me. Marcus. They stood there quietly, watching the city below. Two people who had faced the world's ugliness and somehow found beauty still worth believing in. And somewhere, across town, a woman named Heather walked out of the Viridian building into sunlight that felt like forgiveness and whispered to herself, This is where I start again. The auditorium lights dimmed as the Atlantic Air logo flickered across the large screen. Rows of employees filled the seats. Faces turned toward the stage. Cameras stood at the back, ready to capture every word. It wasn't a press event. It wasn't a PR stunt. It was something quieter, more intimate, an internal company meeting that felt like confession. Marcus Cole stood at the podium, the faint hum of the microphone echoing in the silence. He looked out at the hundreds of uniforms before him: pilots, flight attendants, engineers, managers. Every face reflected a mix of curiosity, tension, and quiet unease. He began calmly. "We've built this company on the idea of connection. But connection means nothing if we only practice it when it's easy." The room stayed still. He continued, his voice strong but measured. "2 weeks ago, an incident occurred on one of our flights. It started as a misunderstanding. It grew into a moment that revealed something much larger, something uncomfortable." He paused, letting that word hang. "We've all seen the video," he said finally. "Some of you were angry. Some of you were embarrassed. Some of you said, 'That's not who we are.' But maybe the truth is harder. Maybe that is who we are when no one's looking." A murmur rippled quietly through the room. Marcus stepped away from the podium slightly, his tone softening. "That's why we're here today. Not to assign blame, but to begin again. To make sure that one moment becomes a turning point, not a stain." He gestured toward the side of the stage. "I've asked 2 people to stand here today. One who was hurt by that moment and one who was changed by it." The audience turned as Heather Grant stepped out first. Her hands shook slightly, but her posture was straight. The murmur in the room deepened. People recognized her face. Then, from the opposite side, Amara Cole walked out. There was no hostility in her stride, only quiet strength. The 2 women met at center stage, standing just a few feet apart. Marcus stepped back, letting them take the moment. Heather took a breath, stepping up to the microphone. "I don't know if I'll say this right," she began, "but I need to say it." Her voice was clear but trembling. "My name is Heather Grant. I've worked for this airline for 20 years, and I was the flight attendant in that video." A hush fell. She continued, "For the last 2 weeks, I've seen my own face on screens around the world. I've read words about myself that hurt, but not because they were cruel, because they were true." Her hands gripped the podium, but she didn't look away from the crowd. "I judged a passenger. I treated her like she didn't belong. I thought I was protecting standards when really, I was protecting my own prejudice." Somewhere in the room, someone shifted uncomfortably. Heather's eyes found Amara's. That passenger was this woman, Amara Cole. And instead of anger, she met me with grace. Amara looked at her gently, saying nothing. Heather's voice broke slightly. "When I saw that kindness, I realized how wrong I'd been, not just to her, but to anyone I ever made feel small. That day changed my life. It broke something I needed broken." She paused, tears glistening under the lights. "I can't change what I did, but I can spend the rest of my life proving I learned from it." She stepped back. The audience stayed silent, absorbing every word. Then Amara stepped forward. Her voice was soft, steady, like calm water after a storm. "I didn't come here today to be applauded," she said. "I came here because forgiveness doesn't mean silence. It means truth with compassion." She looked around the room, meeting eyes in every direction. "I've spent most of my life walking into rooms where people decided who I was before I spoke. Rooms like this, planes like yours." She smiled faintly. "And yet, I still believe people can change, because I've seen it happen. I saw it in Heather." Heather's shoulders shook slightly, but she smiled through it. Amara continued, "When someone hurts you, it's easy to build walls. But healing doesn't happen behind walls. It happens in conversations just like this." The audience was utterly silent now. Amara took a breath. We're all passengers on something bigger than ourselves. And maybe the point isn't how high we fly, but how we treat the people who sit beside us. Her words hung in the air like a prayer. Marcus stepped forward again, clapping once softly, but enough to start something. The room joined in, hesitant at first, then louder. It wasn't applause for a performance. It was gratitude for courage. When the clapping faded, Marcus said, "This is what leadership looks like. Not perfection, progress. Today marks the beginning of our Equal Skies initiative, a promise that every voice, every face, every story will have space here." He turned to Heather and Amara. These two women are the first voices of that promise. Afterward, the crowd filed out slowly, the weight of the moment still lingering. Some hugged quietly. Others wiped away tears they didn't expect. In the hallway, a young attendant approached Heather. She looked nervous but determined. "Ms. Grant." Heather turned. "Yes." The young woman smiled shyly. "I just wanted to say thank you. For admitting it, it makes me feel like I can admit my own mistakes, too." Heather smiled, tears welling again. "That's how it starts," she said softly. "One truth at a time." Across the room, Amara was surrounded by a small group of employees, men and women of every background. They thanked her, some awkwardly, some emotionally. She listened to each one, her patience infinite. Marcus watched from a distance. Pride swelled quietly in his chest. Not pride in accomplishment, but in integrity. Later, when the building was nearly empty, he found Amara standing on the balcony, the city skyline glowing beneath the evening sky. "You did it," he said softly. She smiled. "We did it." Heather's words reached them. He said, "More than any memo or speech ever could." Amara nodded. "Because pain speaks a language people remember." Marcus looked at her, admiration in his eyes. "You've turned one act of cruelty into a movement of empathy." She smiled faintly. "That's the thing about storms, Marcus. They clear the air." He took her hand gently. "Do you ever get tired of forgiving?" Amara looked out over the city lights. "No. I get tired of needing to, but I'll never stop doing it." They stood there quietly as the city below pulsed with life. Somewhere far away, planes rose into the night sky, their lights blinking like small promises against the dark. And in that moment, forgiveness didn't feel like surrender. It felt like flight. The conference room smelled faintly of coffee and new beginnings. Rows of Atlantic Air employees filled the seats, notebooks open, eyes cautious but curious. Heather Grant stood at the front, hands clasped. It had been 3 weeks since the company launched the Equal Skies program, and today was the first official workshop. She was leading it. A few months ago, the thought would have terrified her. Now, it humbled her. On the screen behind her, the words glowed softly, empathy at 37,000 feet. She took a slow breath and began. "When I first joined this company," she said, "I thought excellence was about perfection, about never breaking rules, never showing weakness, never questioning my own voice." She looked out at the group. But excellence isn't perfection. It's compassion in motion. It's how we treat people when no one's watching. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Heather clicked the remote. A still image appeared the frame from the viral video. Paused right at the moment she stood above Amara's seat. Face tense, eyes cold, her throat tightened. "This was me," she said softly. "And this is not who I wanted to be." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "I'm not showing this to make you feel sorry for me," Heather continued. "I'm showing it because I want you to see what pride looks like when it wears a uniform." She let the silence breathe, then smiled faintly. "It's uncomfortable. I know. It was uncomfortable for me too. But discomfort is where change starts." In the back row, a young flight attendant raised her hand. "Miss Grant, were you afraid to come back after?" All that Heather nodded, terrified. I thought everyone would look at me and see only my mistake. But you know what I realized? She paused, scanning the room. People already knew my mistake. What they needed to see was my redemption. A few heads nodded. Someone whispered, "That's powerful." Heather smiled. Empathy doesn't erase the past. It redeems it. From the side of the room, Marcus Cole watched quietly. He'd come to support her, but he stayed in the background. This was Heather's day. As the workshop continued, Heather invited the group into conversation. She played role-play exercises, asked them to imagine situations, microaggressions, misunderstandings, moments where power and pride blurred. Each time someone hesitated, she reminded them gently, "You can't grow if you can't get uncomfortable." At one point, a senior flight attendant spoke up. "I've worked here 25 years, he said. "I've seen hundreds of passengers come and go, but sometimes they're rude. They push boundaries. How do we stay calm when someone crosses the line?" Heather thought for a moment. By remembering the difference between reaction and response. Reaction is pride. Response is professionalism. She smiled. And empathy doesn't mean letting people walk over you. It means seeing their humanity even when they forget yours. The man nodded slowly, a thoughtful look in his eyes. Later, as the session ended, Heather took a final breath. "Before you go," she said softly, "I want you to meet someone who helped me rediscover what compassion looks like." The door opened. Amara Cole stepped in. The room straightened immediately. Some people had seen her only on screens. Others whispered her name. Amara smiled warmly. "Good morning, everyone." Her tone was calm but confident, the kind of voice that carried wisdom without needing volume. "I came here today not as a CEO," she said, "but as a passenger who once needed to be seen not for my title, not for my achievements, but for my humanity." She glanced toward Heather and smiled gently. "And the person who taught me that humanity can be restored stands right here beside me." Heather lowered her gaze, humbled. Amara continued, "You all carry something powerful. You have the ability to shape how people feel at 37,000 feet in the air. For a few hours, you are their home, their first impression, their safety." Her words landed with quiet power. "That's more than service. That's stewardship." Someone in the front row wiped their eyes. Amara looked toward Heather. "When I met Heather, I saw something familiar. A woman trying to hold herself together in a world that often asks too much. What I didn't see then, but see now, is a woman brave enough to face herself." Heather felt her throat tighten again. Amara turned back to the group. "We all make mistakes, but real change happens when we let those mistakes become mirrors, not walls." The room fell silent again, but it wasn't heavy. It was sacred. When the workshop ended, applause rose not loud or forced, but steady and genuine. It was the sound of understanding. Afterward, Heather and Amara stepped into the hallway together. Heather exhaled, half laughing, half crying. "I didn't think I could do it." Amara smiled. "You did more than do it. You turned your pain into purpose." Heather leaned against the wall, shaking her head. "It's strange. I used to think vulnerability made people lose respect for you. Now I think it's what earns it. Amara nodded. Because it makes you real. And real is where people connect. Marcus joined them, hands in his pockets. That was incredible, he said quietly. You both just rewrote what corporate culture can look like. Heather chuckled softly. I wasn't trying to rewrite anything. I was just trying not to fall apart. Marcus smiled. That's where the best stories start. Later that evening, after everyone had gone, Heather lingered in the empty conference room. The screen was off now. The chairs were stacked. The air was still. She walked to the window. Outside, the city lights twinkled like constellations. She thought about the faces she'd seen that day, the way some nodded, the way others wiped tears. She realized she'd done something bigger than saving her job. She'd saved her voice. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number appeared. Hi, Heather. This is Grace. I was one of the women who helped make the green bag. I saw your talk online. Thank you for standing up and speaking truth. We're proud of you. Heather stared at the message, stunned. Then her eyes filled. She typed back, Thank you. I'm learning what grace really means. When she put her phone down, she whispered into the quiet. Maybe that's what flying was always about, learning to rise again. The next morning, Marcus stood in his office, reading an email from an aviation magazine. The Equal Skies initiative was being recognized internationally, not as a PR campaign, but as a movement. Amara joined him, coffee in hand. They want an interview, she said. He smiled. Let's do it. The story isn't ours anymore. It belongs to everyone who believes in better. Amara nodded. Then let's keep telling it. Outside, a plane lifted off into the pale blue sky. It shimmered in the sunlight, wings catching gold. Inside the cabin of that plane, a new generation of attendants greeted passengers with fresh smiles and open hearts. Somewhere in that moment, the legacy of one mistake had turned into 1,000 acts of grace. The rain was soft that morning, brushing against the windows of the Cole residence like whispered thoughts. Amara stood by the glass wall of her home office, coffee in hand, watching the gray clouds settle over London. The world had changed quickly in the past month. The Equal Skies initiative had become a global story. Every major outlet was running features on how one airline turned a public scandal into a lesson in humanity. Amara's name was everywhere. So was Heather's. So was Marcus's. She should have felt proud. But that morning, pride wasn't what filled her chest. It was something else, something quieter. Tiredness. The kind that seeps into the soul after months of holding composure for everyone else. Behind her, Marcus entered, phone in hand, his voice low and calm. We've got requests from the Wall Street Journal, BBC, and Business Insider. They all want your comment on the movement. Amara didn't turn around. You know what's strange? Marcus. The story stopped being ours a long time ago. He smiled faintly. That's what happens when truth hits a nerve. People make it their own. Amara finally faced him. Do you ever worry that we've become symbols instead of people? Marcus tilted his head. Sometimes, but symbols inspire. People fade. She laughed softly. That's exactly what scares me. He stepped closer, gently setting his phone down. You've been carrying this too long. Let the story breathe without you for a while. She shook her head. I can't. Not yet. There's one more thing I need to do. Marcus raised an eyebrow. And what's that? Amara took a sip of coffee, eyes thoughtful. Go back to where it started. Horchinisin, oh boy. In song, he no bon. 2 weeks later, Amara stood at the departure gate of an Atlantic Air flight from New York to London, the same route, the same aircraft type, the same airline. The familiar scent of jet fuel and coffee filled the air. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from memory. She wasn't there as a CEO this time. She wasn't there as the wife of the airline's chief executive. She was just another passenger. Seat 2A. The boarding process unfolded like a movie she'd already seen. The hum of the jet bridge, the shuffle of designer luggage, the polite smiles of the crew. One of the attendants, a young woman with chestnut hair and kind eyes, approached her. "Good evening, Ms. Cole. Welcome aboard." Amara smiled. "Thank you. Lena." She'd read the name tag. There was no condescension in the girl's voice, no judgment in her eyes. Just warmth, genuine warmth. Amara settled into her seat, placing her emerald green bag, still the same one, beside her. As the engines roared to life, she closed her eyes. For a moment, she could almost hear Heather's voice in her head, the way it used to sound sharp, cold, clipped, then the way it sounded now steady, reflective, gentle. The flight took off into a sea of silver clouds. An hour later, Lena returned with a soft smile. "Would you like something to drink, Ms. Cole?" "Just water, please," Amara said. Lena nodded, returning moments later with a glass placed perfectly on a coaster. It was a small thing, a coaster, but Amara felt something catch in her throat, the quiet symbol of a culture repaired. She looked up. "Thank you. Lena." The attendant smiled. "Of course. My pleasure." When Lena left, Amara stared out the window, watching the thin blue curve of Earth stretch into the distance. Marcus had once told her that altitude changes perspective. Maybe that's why flying always made her emotional. It reminded her how small things looked from above, and how big they felt when you were living them. A soft chime interrupted her thoughts. "Ladies and gentlemen," the pilot's voice came through, "we'd like to welcome you aboard this flight, operated in partnership with the Equal Skies Initiative. We're proud to be part of a company that believes empathy is our highest altitude." Applause filled the cabin. A few passengers smiled at her knowingly. Amara blinked away tears. At 37,000 feet, she felt the full circle close, not as a headline, not as a moral lesson, but as a human moment of grace. Hours later, when the plane touched down at Heathrow, she waited for the crowd to thin before standing. As she walked toward the exit, she noticed a poster near the door. It was simple, a black background, white text, and the image of a single wing. The words read, "Fly kind." Underneath, in small print, was a quote from Heather Grant. "Empathy doesn't erase the past. It helps us rise above it." Amara smiled, pressing her hand lightly against the poster. Outside the gate, Heather was waiting. She wasn't in uniform today, just a pale blue blouse and a quiet smile. Amara walked toward her. "You came," Heather said softly. "I had to," Amara replied. "I needed to see it, to feel it." Heather nodded. "It's different now. The crews talk about it every day. The policies, the training, it's real, not just words." Amara studied her. "And how are you?" Heather smiled faintly. "Still learning, but for the first time in years. I love my job again." They both stood in silence for a moment, watching passengers pass by. Amara said gently, "You know, when I think about everything that happened, I don't see a villain and a victim anymore." Heather tilted her head. "What do you see?" "A story about two people who reminded a company what humanity looks like," Amara said softly. "And maybe reminded the world too." Heather's eyes glistened. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Amara smiled. You didn't give up on yourself. That's the harder part. They shared a quiet embrace, no cameras, no applause, just two women bound by the strangest kind of sisterhood. When they pulled away, Heather laughed softly. You know, that green bag of yours, it's kind of famous now. Amara chuckled. Good. Let it be a reminder that beauty can come from anything, even misunderstanding. As they walked toward the terminal doors, sunlight broke through the clouds. The light hit the glass ceiling, scattering across the floor like tiny constellations. For the first time in months, Amara felt light again. Later that night, back home, she sat on the terrace with Marcus. The city hummed below, alive and endless. He looked at her and smiled. You went back to the sky, didn't you? She nodded and found what I left up there. What was that? She smiled. My peace. He reached for her hand. You think people will remember. She looked up at the stars. Not the way we think. But maybe that's okay. Maybe the goal was never to be remembered. Maybe it was just to help the next person feel seen. Marcus squeezed her hand. That's the altitude that matters most. They sat in silence, the night stretching wide around them. In the distance, a plane passed across the stars, its light small but steady. And somewhere between the quiet earth and the endless sky, Grace still flew. The morning air was crisp over Manhattan. The skyline shimmered in the distance, catching the pale gold of sunrise, inside a glass tower on Madison Avenue. Amara Cole stood at a long table surrounded by journalists, nonprofit leaders, and business executives. She'd been invited to speak at the Global Impact Forum, a summit for CEOs redefining corporate ethics. The theme this year, the ripple effect. As she adjusted her notes, she saw her reflection in the glass wall, poised, calm. A woman who had weathered storms and learned to breathe above them. When her name was called, applause filled the room. She walked to the podium, her emerald dress glinting softly under the lights, a subtle nod to that now famous bag. She began simply, a few months ago, I boarded a flight as just another passenger. I left that plane as a mirror, one that showed a company who it really was. The room quieted. She continued. What happened on that flight was not a tragedy. It was a revelation. It showed us that dignity is fragile, but also that it can be rebuilt if we have the courage to face what we see. As she spoke, a photo appeared behind her on the screen. Heather and her standing side by side at the Equal Skies workshop, smiling. I learned that redemption is not about forgetting the past, she said. It's about transforming it. Pain becomes purpose. Shame becomes strength. She looked out across the audience. And that's what Equal Skies became, not a PR program, not a corporate checklist, but a cultural reset. The applause rose again, but she lifted a hand gently to pause it. The truth is, what we started was never meant to stay in one company. It's meant to travel, to ripple outward. She told them how other airlines had begun reaching out: Jet Horizon, Nova Air, even smaller carriers in South America asking to join the initiative. She described schools inviting Heather to speak, and manufacturing companies requesting diversity training modeled after Equal Skies. It's not about aviation, she said softly. It's about elevation of hearts, not just systems. The words hung in the air like prayer. After the talk, as people surrounded her, one young woman approached shyly. She couldn't have been more than 24. Ms. Cole, she said, I wanted to thank you. I'm studying hospitality. Your story changed how I see my future. I used to think serving people meant being invisible. Now I understand it means making others feel seen. Amara smiled warmly. touched. "What's your name, Naomi?" she said. "Naomi Banks." "Naomi," Amara repeated. "Keep that heart. The world needs leaders like you, quiet ones who know when to listen." The young woman's eyes glistened. "Thank you. I will." Later that day, back in her hotel suite, Amara sat by the window overlooking Central Park. The city pulsed below cabs, voices, the rhythm of life. She opened her laptop to hundreds of new messages. Some were from CEOs, some were from ordinary people. One subject line caught her eye. From the women of Green Thread. She clicked it. The message was simple. "Amara, we saw the news. We're proud to see what you've done with the bag we made. You turned fabric into a movement. Thank you for showing the world that what's stitched with love can carry change. With gratitude, the Green Thread Collective, Nairobi." Her hand covered her mouth. Tears welled. The ripple, she thought. It's already traveling farther than we'll ever know. Her phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. "Dinner tonight. Just us. No cameras. No speeches." She smiled and replied, "Only if there's dessert." He texted back a single heart. "Nah, deny." That evening, they met at a small jazz restaurant tucked away in the West Village. No reserved signs, no security, no press. Just low lights, brass instruments, and the hum of real people. Marcus raised his glass. "To the woman who taught an industry how to feel again." Amara laughed softly. "And to the man who believed it could happen." They clinked glasses. For the first time in months, there was no weight between them, just quiet gratitude. As the saxophone began to play, Marcus leaned closer. "Did I tell you Heather's keynote is trending?" Amara smiled. "I saw it. She's better on camera than she knows." "She's honest," Marcus said. "That's rare. She doesn't perform redemption. She lives it." Amara nodded. "That's why people listen." Marcus looked thoughtful. "You ever wonder why this story hit so deep with people? It wasn't just the scandal. It was the humanity. The world starved for it." Amara leaned back. "Because everyone's been Heather at some point, proud, afraid, blind. And everyone's been me, dismissed, unseen. We all live on both sides of the aisle." He smiled. "That's the truth right there." The music swelled softly between them. For a moment, they sat in silence, just two souls resting from the storm. Then Marcus said quietly, "You know, Equal Skies isn't just changing airlines. I got a message this morning. The Department of Transportation wants to make parts of it a model for federal service standards." Amara blinked. "You're kidding." "I'm not." He grinned. "Looks like you started something much bigger than either of us." She shook her head, smiling. "No, we did." As the night deepened, a small crowd gathered near the stage. The singer, an older woman with a velvet voice, introduced her last song. "This one," she said, "is about learning to fly again, even after you've fallen." Amara felt something stir inside her. The lyrics drifted through the room. "You can't keep a good heart on the ground." Marcus reached for her hand. She squeezed it gently. At that moment, she realized that every person in that room carried a story of falling and rising again. And that maybe, just maybe, that was the real ripple, the invisible current connecting strangers through shared humanity. The next morning, before their flight back to London, Amara received a letter slipped under her hotel door. It was handwritten. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. She unfolded it slowly. "Dear Mrs. Cole, I was on the flight that day. I filmed part of what happened. For months. I told myself I did the right thing. But watching you and Heather rebuild what I helped expose, I realize I also played a part in turning pain into progress. Thank you for showing me that viral can mean vital. You didn't just change an airline, you changed people like me. I'll never forget it. With respect, Ben Carter. Amara smiled softly. The filmmaker. The man who had unknowingly started it all. She folded the letter and placed it carefully inside her journal. As she zipped her suitcase, she glanced at the green bag resting on the table. It had traveled with her through every chapter, from humiliation to healing, from confrontation to compassion. Now it felt less like a bag and more like a story stitched in leather and hope. Marcus appeared at the door. Ready? Amara nodded. Always. He smiled. London's waiting. As they walked through the airport hand in hand, no one stopped them. No cameras followed. They were just another couple, boarding another flight, and as the plane lifted off, the city shrinking below, Amara leaned her head against Marcus's shoulder. The ripple, she whispered. He smiled. Still moving. Above the clouds, the world stretched endlessly, no lines, no labels, just light, and somewhere in that sky, a story about a bag, a mistake, and a second chance kept traveling from one heart to another, a ripple that had become a wave. The wind rolled gently over the hills outside Nairobi, carrying with it the scent of rain and clay. Beyond the dirt road, a small workshop stood at the edge of a field, its roof lined with solar panels and its walls painted in soft emerald green. The sign read, The Green Thread Collective. Inside, women sat at long wooden tables, their sewing machines humming softly. Bolts of plant-based leather were stacked neatly by the windows. On one table, a half-finished handbag rested elegant, simple, familiar. A woman named Grace looked up from her work as a black car pulled into the yard. She smiled as she saw who stepped out. Amara Cole. Grace hurried to the door, wiping her hands on her apron. Mrs. Cole, you came. Amara smiled warmly. I said I would. The two women embraced, laughter and tears mixing in equal measure. It's been years since we shipped that first batch, Grace said. And now look at us. Orders from airlines, fashion houses, even universities, all because of that story. Amara glanced around the workshop, her heart swelling. No, she said softly, all because of your hands. You created beauty when the world told you it wasn't valuable. I just carried it into the light. Grace's eyes shimmered. You carried it well. They walked through the workshop together. The air buzzed with the quiet rhythm of creation laughter, conversation, the clicking of thread through fabric. Amara paused by one of the younger women. What's your name? She asked. Lillian, the girl said shyly. I started last year. Amara smiled. And what do you want to do with your work, Lillian? The girl hesitated, then said, I want people to hold something I made and feel seen. Amara's eyes softened. Then you already understand what this place is about. Grace led her into a small adjoining room, simple, with a round table and a single-frame photograph on the wall. It was of Amara and Heather, standing together at the first Equal Skies event. Beneath it was a quote, Empathy is the altitude of the heart. Amara exhaled, her gaze fixed on the photo. She'd love to see this, she murmured. She already did, Grace said, handing her a small envelope. This came for you. Amara opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note in Heather's familiar script. Amara, I'm writing from Sydney. We just finished another Equal Skies seminar. 20 airlines now. 20. I still can't believe it. I wanted you to know something. Every time I speak, I carry your name with me. not to remind people of my mistake, but to remind them that redemption only exists because forgiveness does. You taught me that. Thank you for giving me my wings back. With love. Heather?" Amara's eyes glistened as she read the final line. Grace smiled softly. "She's still flying." Amara nodded. "We all are." They sat together, sharing tea as the rain began to fall outside, the sound tapping gently on the roof. After a moment, Grace asked, "Do you ever wonder how far the story went?" Amara smiled thoughtfully. "Farther than I'll ever know. But maybe that's how light works. It keeps traveling, even after we stop seeing it." Months later, back in London, the Equal Skies Global Summit was held at Atlantic Air headquarters. Delegates from over 30 countries attended, executives, educators, even government officials. Marcus opened the event with quiet pride. His voice carried calm authority. What began as one woman's pain and one company's reckoning has now become a shared purpose across industries. This isn't just policy, it's humanity at work. When Amara took the stage, the applause was thunderous. She stood still for a moment, letting the sound fade. She began softly. "When I was younger, my grandmother used to tell me, the world doesn't need perfect people. It needs brave ones." For a long time, I didn't understand that, but now I do. She paused, glancing around the room. Bravery isn't loud. It's the quiet act of showing up again after the world has seen your worst moment. The audience listened in silence. Heather showed up. She continued. Marcus showed up. Every one of you in this room who chose compassion over comfort showed up. That's how change happens. One act of courage at a time. Behind her, a screen displayed images, crews helping passengers, training sessions, factories producing ethical materials. The ripple had become a wave, just as she'd hoped. She smiled. The world isn't healed by policies. It's healed by people. The room rose in applause once more, not just for Amara, but for the idea she represented, that empathy, once awakened, doesn't fade. Later that night, long after the crowd had gone, Amara and Marcus stood together in the empty auditorium. The stage lights were dim now, leaving only a soft glow. Marcus slipped his arm around her shoulders. "You know, this might be your last speech for a while. You've earned a break." Amara laughed quietly. "Maybe, but you know me. I'll find another mountain to climb." He smiled. "I know." She walked down the steps of the stage, her heels clicking softly against the floor. "Marcus, do you ever think about how strange it is? How everything came from that one flight?" He nodded. A moment that could have destroyed us became the thing that defined us. Amara turned to face him. "That's the funny thing about grace. It doesn't erase the cracks. It turns them into light." Marcus kissed her forehead gently. "Then I hope we keep shining." They stood together as the lights above dimmed completely, leaving only the glow from the city skyline through the tall glass windows. For a long moment, neither spoke. There was nothing left to say, just gratitude, quiet and whole. Weeks later, Amara visited a small museum exhibit in London titled "Stories That Changed the Sky." Inside, displays chronicled the Equal Skies movement photos, letters, news clippings, even the original viral video that had started it all. In the center of the room sat a glass case. Inside it rested one object, the green handbag. A plaque below it read, "This bag belonged to Amara Cole, CEO of Viridian Materials." Once a target of prejudice, it became a global symbol of empathy and transformation. Handmade from sustainable leather by the Green Thread Collective, Nairobi, Kenya. Amara stood before it quietly. Around her, visitors moved slowly, reading the words, some wiping tears. A little girl tugged her mother's sleeve nearby. "Mommy," she whispered, "why is the bag so special?" Her mother smiled softly. "Because someone was brave enough to carry it." Amara felt her throat tighten. She turned, her eyes meeting the child's for just a second. The girl smiled shyly before walking away. As Amara left the museum, the sky outside was streaked with gold and violet, the kind of light that happens only at dusk, when the world is halfway between day and night. She stood for a moment on the steps, feeling the cool breeze brush her face. Then she looked up at a plane soaring across the sky, its wings catching the last of the sun. And she smiled, because she knew somewhere up there, someone was looking out a window, feeling seen, maybe even changed. And the ripple continued, maybe forever. This story reminds us that grace is stronger than anger, and that dignity speaks louder than pride. Amara didn't just defend herself, she transformed humiliation into healing. She chose to forgive when the world expected revenge, and that single choice rippled through boardrooms, policies, and people's hearts across continents. The real message here isn't about luxury or power or even justice. It's about how each of us holds the power to shape how kindness travels. Every small act of empathy, every time we choose understanding over ego, we build a world that's a little softer, a little safer. For older generations watching this, maybe you've seen the same pattern moments when silence hurt more than words, when pride built walls between people who could have shared peace instead. Let this story be a reminder. It's never too late to be kind, to listen, to start again. Because change doesn't begin with big speeches. It begins with small, human choices. And maybe, just maybe, the next time you find yourself in a difficult moment, you'll remember Amara Cole's calm, her strength, her grace, and choose light over anger. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you even just a little, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps these stories reach more hearts, and maybe together, we'll make the world a little kinder.